And now, coming to you live from the City of Angels, Los Angeles, California, it's the Sheena Metal Experience with your host, Sheena Metal, only on KGRA Digital Broadcasting.
Hi, and welcome to the Sheena Metal Experience on KGRA Digital Broadcasting Network every Friday at 3 o'clock Pacific time. I'm Sheena Metal. I'm your host. I'm a psychic medium. I'm an interfaith minister. I'm a 27-year talk radio host in Los Angeles. I'm a performing artist, and I come to you live from my home in LA each week. This show is about spirituality. It's about creativity. It's about humanity. It's about passion. It's about service. It's about becoming your best you in this big, beautiful world, and then inspiring others to do the same. And of course, always, it's about love. And each week on the show, it may be my show, but it is always, most definitely, my friends, your experience. My guest this week is a dear friend and a wonderful person. He is a brilliant actor, writer, director, producer, humanitarian, and I just love being in his presence. His energy is contagious, and for me, that's the best kind of person. You know him, of course, from all of his wonderful work on The Love Boat and more. But did you know that he once played my baby daddy in a wonderful show called Child of the 70s? Please welcome to the show the wonderful Ted Lange is here. How are you, my friend? And I say that, but I always have to clarify that
Hello,
you were the reluctant baby daddy because we stole your sperm. You were just the unsuspecting doctor.
Yes, that was a fun show. Yes.
And you know what's very strange about art imitating life? When Michael Vaccaro, who wrote and produced that show, when he wrote that storyline, he didn't know that I am myself a donor baby, and that my father was some unknown doctor. Isn't that a strange? There are no accidents, right? You think things just materialize. Wow. It's kind of the collective consciousness. Yeah, so I was basically saying I don't think my mom stole the sperm. I'm pretty sure she bought it. I don't think she stole it.
Yeah.
But you never know. So yeah, isn't that how the universe works, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah. There's a certain symmetry to the universe that I like to say. You know, sometimes things come into your life that you had no idea or you thinking you might need it, and then somehow the universe shows you how you can use this. You know, so yeah, there is a certain symmetry to the universe.
I agree. Absolutely. Yeah. And since this is the first time I've interviewed you, since I've been very open about my spiritual life, which I used to be very quiet about until my mom passed. When you write, when you create, right, when things come through the channel and suddenly there's a show, right? Do you consider that a co-creation between you and universe?
Oh, absolutely. Because you know what it is you open yourself up. You open yourself up to receive.
Yes.
You know? And what I think, and I used to say this because when I wrote, I found I wrote better at night. And the reason for that, I deduce, I don't know if it's true or not, but I deduce that everybody was asleep. And the universe is sending things through the atmosphere. And when a lot of people are asleep, it's easier to come into your consciousness because there's not a lot of static of other energy blocking you.
Yes.
You know? So I always found it was better to write at night, particularly when I first started out, because I could receive the information, digest it, and then translate it onto paper much easier in the evening than it. So I would write 2 o'clock in the morning. Nobody's up at
Sure.
2 o'clock. Very few people are up at
Sure.
2 o'clock, 3 o'clock
I am. You
in the
can call
morning,
me.
and I
I
would
am.
be writing. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah,
yeah,
I agree. I like to work at night for the same reason. I like
yeah,
the peace and the
yeah.
serenity of it. And when I'm, I live between the San Fernando Valley and the ocean. When I'm at the ocean where I am now, there's just a kind of a magic spiritual veil that sets over everything after midnight when you're so close to the water. And I think it's the creativity all around. When I worked in the music business for many years, right about at the time when it was shifting from everybody being in a commercial studio to many people creating their own home studios. And I've had so many musicians tell me that the home studio is so wonderful because sometimes you wake up at 3 a.m. and you've got a little something in your head, right? And to be able to crawl downstairs to a quiet room where it's just you and just kind of tinker with it and let it out without any pressure or the clock ticking. Sometimes the best music comes that way. And I think it's the same. It's always been that way with writers, right? That you find that solitary space where your head isn't all cluttered up with three-dimensional stuff. And then you allow the spiritual stuff to come in and co-create the ideas with you. And you're an incredibly prolific playwright, right? How many plays now?
I'm on my 26th play right now, written
Wow.
25, and they've gone all around the country. And if anybody wants to see some of my plays, I've done readings on them, and they're on YouTube. So you just go to YouTube, type in my name, and then one of my plays is like called Blues in My Coffee. So you would write, you go to YouTube, Ted Lange, Blues in My Coffee, and my play will pop up, and I have some
Wow.
wonderful actors, and they're doing a
It's
reading of
great.
my play. I did a play on Shylock from Merchant of Venice, and my play on Shylock runs parallel to Merchant of Venice. So when
Oh, wow.
Shylock is on the stage in Merchant of Venice, and he goes off stage, he's in my play, and so it goes back and forth. So I take the same time frame, but I do it from a Jewish point of view in my
Mm.
play because I'm talking about what it's like to be an immigrant. And the other immigrant that's in my play is Othello. And
Mm.
Othello and Shylock are best friends. And so they talk about their status as immigrants. That's also on YouTube. That's called The Tears of Shylock. And then I
Wow.
have another play about William Shakespeare because there's been some controversy about whether or not Shakespeare wrote all of his plays. They think some other people wrote them. And so
Absolutely.
I
Sure.
had some friends give me all of this information. They gave me this information. And this is during COVID, Sheena. I wrote this play called Shakespeare Over My Shoulder. And I took all the information from about 5 or 6 books and I put it into this play. And it's the people that they think wrote the play, and it's Shakespeare as a young man, like he's 30 years old. And that's a fun one. That's called Shakespeare Over My Shoulder. All three of those, you can go on YouTube and find those plays, or you can go on Amazon, and I have published versions of those plays on Amazon.
And you also have that other
Yeah.
wonderful play about Othello, right? That I went to the opening night of. I remember you doing some radio with me, and we were talking about
Yes,
Iago, who
that's
I think, in my opinion, Iago, Shakespeare wrote Iago as sort of the perfect narcissist, right? The perfect malignant narcissist. But in your play,
yeah,
he's almost a little
yes,
misunderstood.
yeah,
There's a human side to him that
yeah,
maybe we don't see
yeah.
in Othello.
Right, exactly. And that was part of the reason for writing it was to give another side to the whole thing. I mean, I did Othello as a younger man, and I went to England and studied at the Royal Academy of Dramatic Arts. And
Sure.
so they wanted me to do Othello, and I had all of these questions. And a lot of the answers that they gave me, I put into that play that you saw. The it's called The Cause My Soul, and it's a prequel to Othello, which kind of, if you're unfamiliar with Othello, it's really good because it puts you in the mindset of what the play is about, and it picks
Right.
up where Shakespeare. It starts before Shakespeare's plays, and it ends right where his play begins. So it kind of gives you a prelude to what's going to happen. But yeah, I've done that. And the other thing I wanted to talk about, which
Yes,
you were talking
please.
about earlier about the universe, is whenever I get
Hmm.
into trouble, with a show, I go to bed and I say just before I go to bed, here's my problem. I don't know how to solve it. And I go to sleep. And Sheena, every time in the middle of the night, I'll solve the problem. Because the
Yeah.
universe says, oh, well, no, the problem can be solved this way. And I get the answer. I get the
Yeah.
answer from the universe. And so then the next morning I write it down and I, get out of whatever problem I have. But yeah.
Yeah. I think that happens so much. And it's kind of about, it's like working uh fluidly with spirit, right? I think that
Yeah.
sometimes for us on the earth, for humans, I'll just speak as humans because I'm a human. Um, Indoctrined religion has sort of taught us throughout the years that we're in opposition with the universe, right? God's always mad. We did this. God's not happy. We did that. God's mad. We're going to be punished. So I think people have sort of been culturalized by that to feel like there's an opposing force that's always going to be angry at us. When the truth is, this is like soul school, right? Spirit is here to help us learn lessons and grow and become more enlightened and become more evolved. So sometimes just asking for what you want or asking for what you need. Like if you're in class and you don't understand something in the lesson and you walk up to the professor and afterwards and say, I'm sorry, I don't understand this part. Usually they'll sit down and explain it to you. And I think it works the same way with spirit. And I think as earthbound creatures, our lives are much happier and much more much less angst ridden if we don't think of higher power as being something that's out to get us or waiting for us to fail or around the corner with a pitchfork, but just this idea that it's a kind of a beautiful benevolent teacher who's here to help us with what we need. And I think your story is a great example of that.
Yeah. Sometimes, this is why I'm not a big fan of organized religion, because there are men that use the fear of religion and the fear of the unknown to
Mm,
manipulate people.
sure.
The Catholic Church has been particularly guilty of that, of using um, what you don't know. In other words, if you go to confession, you don't kneel in prayer on your own. You go to a priest who then interprets what your
Right.
confession is
Right.
and gives you penance. Because they're saying, well, I'm in contact with God. Well, why don't I just pray to God and maybe
Yeah.
I'll get the answer
Yeah.
to what
Sure.
I need myself. I don't need
Yeah.
you, because you say you're a professional priest, to help me communicate to God. I can do it on my own. That's what prayer is. Prayer is me kneeling before the universe, before God, before the thing that is outstretched before us, praying, and then maybe the answer will pop into my head. So I am not a big fan of organized religions, and they all organize. I mean,
Sure.
Judaism does it, Islam does it, where the guys that are in charge manipulate the masses for sometimes their own benefit.
Right. And this is how
When
I
we
think of
can
clergy.
just sit and
And this is how I think of clergy, and I am a
yeah,
minister, right? Clergy are kind of like the guy that works at the vitamin store. You can go into the vitamin store and you can buy your own vitamins. But then sometimes you have a question about the vitamins, so you want to ask somebody who's been studying the vitamins for years. And I think that's what clergy is. We're here to
right,
be, first of all, a sounding board, community, someone to talk to, but we're also here to sometimes maybe help work out something that somebody has questions about. But this idea that you can't touch your own higher power unless a human being says it's okay, I mean, that kind of goes against
yeah.
everything the universe was created around, right, Ted?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. You have to trust yourself, and you have the information, you have the ability. But if you don't trust yourself, then you get sidetracked sometimes. Trust yourself. You know how to
Yeah.
pray. Trust yourself. You know how to
Yes.
meditate. Trust yourself. And
Absolutely.
sometimes I think that will be a lot more helpful than going to someone.
I agree. And
Yeah.
and also when you get an answer back, listen. Don't think you're crazy or you couldn't be getting a
Yeah.
message or doubting all the time. Well, I got this message to write this thing or do this thing, but this probably is dumb and I shouldn't do it. No, trust when the messages come, trust that they're a good thing and believe in them. I think
Yeah.
that we talk ourselves out of so much. I always say that we come to earth kind of perfect spiritual beings, right? And then human beings convince us why we've done it all wrong, and then we sort of spend the rest of our lives trying to unlearn the
Yeah.
bad behaviors and go back to when we came here as a perfect spiritual being. And it's a lot of it is unlearning a lot of stuff that's been put on
Yeah.
us by people, and people telling us you can't do this. And I think certainly as young creative people, I know um, growing up in acting school, and probably you too, right? They were always the teachers that were trying to tell you this is the only way to do it. If that's happening, it's wrong. You only can play these roles. This is never going to happen for you. And a lot of my life as a creative person, my young life, was unlearning a lot of that.
Yeah. Absolutely. And what's interesting is the teachers that say this, I have the only answer. And then as you continue on this, you find answers from different other teachers that are just as viable. So,
Yes.
you have to beware of the teachers that I'm the only answer. Stanislavski is the only man. I'm the only guy that knows how to teach.
Right.
No, there are a million. There are 300. I say there's 360 degrees in a circle.
Yes.
Pick one degree. Well, now there's still a whole slew of other degrees that you can get the information from. So
Right.
don't limit yourself just by one degree.
Absolutely. And even
360 degrees. Try.
absolutely. And part of that is listening to higher power, right? I mean, you can study and go to medical school and learn all the answers to everything, but that doesn't make you a healer. That doesn't teach you how to deal with people in crisis. That doesn't teach you how to say the right thing when someone is sick or dying or someone's grieving someone they've lost. That is listening to that inner voice, right? And I think it's the same
Right.
thing about acting. You learn and learn and learn and learn, or music or anything, right? And then when you're at the 11th hour, you kind of throw it all away and just channel and trust. And I think if you live, when I started living my life like that, just trusting more, doubting less, and not trying to intellectualize everything all the time, I became a much happier person because I realized I was sort of throwing myself against a closed door all the time when there was an open door right next to it I wasn't walking through. I think you know what I
Yeah.
mean? Getting myself
Yeah,
into
I
too
know
much trouble
exactly.
I didn't need to be in by overthinking everything and trying. My mama used to say that human beings were just smart enough to be dangerous. And I certainly think that's
Wow.
something that we've all
Wow.
been guilty of in our
Yeah.
lives. And as creative people, right? When you write something and it feels good, or you get off stage and it feels good and you feel one with the universe, don't second guess it. Don't start breaking it apart. Don't start thinking, oh, maybe it wasn't that great. Just enjoy that moment and take that beautiful creative and spiritual victory, and don't beat yourself up and go on to the next one.
Yeah. That was the beauty of George Lucas. He took all of that information and channeled it into a sci-fi story
Yeah.
where he says, trust the force. Now,
Mm.
that's just an analogy to something else, which is what is the force? We can't see the force, but that's the
Mhm.
universe. And that's why that thing is so popular even to
Yeah.
this day. They're
Yeah.
still doing Star Wars story because this guy clued into something in the universe that used him as a vessel to propagate this idea, and that's all
Mhm.
about art. That's artistry. you
Yeah,
know?
it's interesting because my father was a design engineer and he was very linear, very much an atheist, very much about. I always say he liked robots more than people. I would have been his favorite child if only I'd been an android. And he loved Isaac Asimov, right? Because Isaac Asimov
Right,
was tech science fiction. It was all about tech.
right,
And so I remember
right.
him insisting we go see Star Wars. And my mom, who was the complete opposite of him, she was all spirituality, psychology, and art. She didn't want to go. And he literally made us all go. We stood in this really long line to go. And we were living in Baltimore at the time. And we waited for hours and walked around the building. And then Star Wars happened. And my mom loved it. And I think she had never seen a science fiction vehicle that had so much spirituality in it. And
Yeah,
even when she was older, we went and saw everything. We went and saw the prequels, and she loved them because it was emotion and spirituality and oneness kind of put into a science fiction situation. And I think that's why they're still so popular. That's why they're still making them. That's why there's 5 new shows every month on Disney Plus, because people need that, right? They
yeah,
need that
yeah,
good feel, but they're also
yeah,
fascinated with the future and what's it going to look like when we have spaceships and
yeah.
when there are all these different species and it's not just us anymore. And I think that's so important, and we obviously need that because I think we see in art, right, Ted, what humanity needs miraculously pops up in art, and suddenly there are all these
Oh,
stories that
yeah.
we need, and so that's definitely something we still need.
Yeah, absolutely. We do. Absolutely. I'm going to Dayton, Ohio later this month. There was a black artist named Paul Lawrence Dunbar. And Paul Lawrence Dunbar was the first crossover black artist who did poetry back at the turn of the century, not this century, but the turn of the last century, from the
Sure.
1890s into the 19th century.
Sure.
And they're celebrating him. Now, some people don't like his art because he did what's called dialect poetry. And in the dialect poetry, it was a kind of an Amos and Andy thing, Brer Rabbit, Brer Fox. That was done by a white writer named Joel Chandler Harris. And
Right.
Joel Chandler Harris used to write these things. But in his writing, black people were the butt of the joke. What
Mm-hmm.
Paul Lawrence Dunbar did was he switched it around so that black people were not the butt of the joke. And he did it in dialect, which was very popular at the time, particularly with Americans across the country. And he reshaped the idea of being a Negro in America at that time. And so they're having a celebration, 150 years,
Wow.
the end of this month, June 25th in Dayton, Ohio. I'm going to that. And they've got other, Nikki Giovanni's going to be there, and a lot of people that do Dunbar's poetry. We're all going to be there. And I don't think his poetry is anything to be embarrassed about. There are some black intellectuals that are embarrassed, but I don't think it's embarrassing. I
Yeah.
think it's a tribute to what this guy did. I'm going to give you a little example
Okay.
right now of a Dunbar poem, okay? And it's called When the Corn Pone's Hot, all right? There is times in life when nature seems to slip a cog and go, just a rattling down creation like an ocean's overflow. When the world just starts a spinning like a picking in its top, and your cup of joy is brimming, well, it's just about to slop, and you feel just like a racer that is training for the trot when your mammy says the blessing and the corn pone's hot. So he took a thing
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
about having dinner, and
Sure.
we weren't the butt of the joke.
Yeah.
We were enjoying the idea of waiting for dinner, and that's the
Sure.
way the poem goes on. It's called when the poem's hot. So if any of your people are interested, they can go online and find it, or they can find it in a Paul Laurence Dunbar book.
It's interesting what you said about intellectuals, about African American intellectuals, right? There's always that kind of person who suddenly decides that anything that appeals to the common man is patronizing in some way. But the truth is, to make something cultural, right, is to make it, to have it appeal to everybody. Because I'm Irish American, right? There are so many Irish works that are like that and Irish bands that are like that. You're trying to appeal to the actual common man, the people that might not have discovered poetry if you had made it too lofty and too inaccessible to them, which is something Shakespeare was criticized about, right? That his stuff was considered not highbrow enough, and it was geared too much towards the people that sat in the front and threw the fruit if they didn't like you. But he also, so many people's lives were touched.
They sat in the balcony. They sat in the balcony and threw stuff down on the groundlings. They threw stuff down and they threw it at the stage.
Right.
Yeah, that was the aristocracy. But if you read some of his poems, some of his plays, what he did was he did write a certain part of the play for what they call the groundlings. The groundlings paid a penny to get into the theater. And what he would do is, for instance, the first scene in Romeo and Juliet is strictly for the groundlings, because it's very nasty and sexual and talking about screwing women and how we're going to get to women and all of that. And then later on, when he gets to Romeo and Juliet, he gets very lofty and he's talking about love and this in iambic pentameter. So there is an art to this, and that's what some people don't realize, that for instance, if you want to reach people, you've got to be able to draw everybody in.
Yes.
You know, and he was able to do that through his art. He drew people in. Yeah, fascinating character. If you really want to see some interesting history about Shakespeare, go to my web thing on YouTube and look at the play Shakespeare Over My Shoulder, because it'll give you an insight, a wonderful insight to Shakespeare and how he approached his art, and how they say these other guys really did it. Some of the names they use is Christopher Marlowe, Edward de Vere, and Francis Bacon. And they're all in my play. And it kind of gives you an insight into what was going on in the 1500s when they were doing theater.
Yeah. And it made me think of when you were talking about Mr. Dunbar, the same thing, that artists get criticized if they're trying to appeal, if their audience becomes appealing to the common man. I think we knock Stephen King for that, right?
Yeah.
But that's the thing I love about Stephen King is that you can read Stephen King and have no education and love it. Or you can be very well read and learned and get all kinds of things out of it that maybe somebody else wouldn't. But it's written on all those levels so everybody can love and understand it. And I think that is so important. Otherwise, it's scary. And scary, of course, which I love.
And scary.
And brilliantly psychological. I mean, that man could write a book from inside a dog's head. I mean, he's brilliant. But often criticized for playing too much to the common man. And I just think if we don't break down those walls, if we don't reach the people that automatically wouldn't go to art and literature, then we're just preaching to the choir over and over again. It's just intellectuals and academics appealing to other intellectuals and academics, and nobody's sending the elevator down and bringing up the people that maybe weren't exposed to that kind of stuff.
Well, that's what the big criticism of Love Boat was, because it was a popular show. The people loved Love Boat. We'd get 70 million people on a premiere. 70 million people on a premiere show. And everybody loved it. So therefore, the critics had an obligation to kind of put it down. But if you watch it now, you'll get sucked right into the show. Whatever story we're telling, you'll get sucked right into it, because it's a popular show. It's for the everyman. It's for the common man.
And that's okay. Sometimes it's just okay to my mama used to say, have shows that you can escape into. Not everything. And the 70s were very messagey, right? Shows like Lou Grant, fantastic, brilliant show, but it was Quincy, they were very messagey. Every episode had a family,
Yeah,
and these were
yeah,
all shows
yeah,
that there was like every
yeah,
week there was there was a message in the episode.
yeah.
Sometimes people just need a release from that. Sometimes you
Norman
just need to
Lear.
think. Right, exactly.
Yeah,
Sometimes you just need fun, and you just need something that's fun. But also Love Boat
yeah,
writes such a rich history of actors that came before. I remember the first time I interviewed you at a live show at the Hollywood Improv, and you told me that when you were doing Love Boat, that you and Fred Grandy would take out some of the older actors and like take them to lunch and get their stories, because that show really was like
yeah,
a cornucopia of the golden era of Hollywood, right? There were so many. Love Boat was either people who were coming up or people who were going out. But so it was this wonderful learning about new actors, or these wonderful
yeah,
actors maybe your parents knew but you didn't know. I was fortunate enough to have a mom that watched TV
yeah.
with me when I was a kid and would say, "Oh, I remember that actor from when would go to a movie when I was 10," or, "Oh, that actor is this person's father," or she would give me the whole lowdown. So I knew who everybody was, but other kids didn't get that education. And how
Yeah.
wonderful for you that you and Fred went and got all the stories. I think that's my favorite story about you.
Yeah, we used to our show resurrected people.
Yes,
Some
right?
people
Yes, it's
they were
beautiful.
done, and then our show, yeah, and our show would bring them back, and then Fred and I would get them, and we'd take them out to lunch, and we'd say, "So, tell us when you did this movie, how was that?" And they go, "Oh, you want to know some stories, young man?" And we go, "Yeah, yeah." And so we got stories that were not in the history books, in the Hollywood history books. We got stories from the people that were actually there. It was fantastic.
That's wonderful. And what did you learn about being an actor? How did you grow emotionally and spiritually as an actor from learning stories of people that worked in this much different era than what you
Well,
grew up in?
yeah. Well, there's a certain professionalism that Fred and I found with people that had been around a long time. For
Mm.
instance, Greer Garson, and your fans may have to look up this name,
Sure,
Greer
sure. I don't.
Garson.
I don't. Luckily, yes. Have to look it up.
Yeah,
Sure.
but she came on the set. She was so professional. She learned everybody's name. She was
Mm.
polite. She'd come in the morning and say, "Good morning, Mr. Lange. How are you?" And I say, "Well, good morning, Miss Garson. How are you?" She knew
Yeah.
the grips names. She learned the
Yeah.
names of the crew, the cinematographer, the director, the focus puller. She learned everybody's name because that's the way they did it in the old days. And
Yeah.
so then it became incumbent upon Fred and myself, to have a certain generosity when we appeared on other shows, and we would learn people's names instead of "Hey you" with the thing and the thing. We'd say,
Yeah.
John or Mr. Davis, can you help me with, and then of course that person who's not used to it loved it, and they actually treated us extra special
Sure.
because we
Sure.
learned their names. We learned their
Yeah.
names. So that was one thing. Greg Garson would always be on time. We knew that. Learn your lines and hit your marks. That was a standard that we knew. But you never saw it more in play than you did with an old timer. They were
Mm.
always there, always ready to go, and they knew what they had to do. And we went, wow, that was a
Yeah.
great, great lesson. And then,
Yeah.
being in show business is not easy. So if you
Mm.
can be generous to actors or to crew people that have just as much joy in their job as you do, and not get snippy or nasty or any of that, it goes a long way. And that's one of the
Yeah.
things that being with some of the old timers taught me, is that, we all trying to achieve the same thing. We want to make a product that people like and want to see. And the more generous we can be with each other, the better off we are. But that's also, that's Christianity, that's Islam, that's Judaism.
Yes.
Do unto others
Yeah.
as you would have them do unto you,
Sure. Yeah. It's
That's in the
Buddhism. Yeah.
religions,
Yeah. It's everything.
Yeah,
Yeah. Well,
Buddhism,
and
all
it's,
of those.
and
Yeah,
also it's I think it is, yes, because everything runs smoother if you're nicer. My mom used to always say it's just as easy to be nice, and it is. It's just as, I think it's even
yeah,
easier to be nice. Also, I think
yeah,
those folks that you interviewed who were working in that golden
yeah,
era, there were no messing around then. They cranked films out fast. I mean, and they cranked TV shows out fast. So they
oh
had to
yeah,
learn to get there and
yeah,
make it happen. And actors that couldn't do it just didn't work again, right? Because you didn't have like 6 months to
right,
make a movie. I mean, they would make a movie in a week, and then the next week they'd be on
yeah,
a different movie. Those contract players, they ran them through films. So, and I love that because there's an
yeah,
efficiency to that. Um, I think that human beings and artists, especially, are never more centered and connected to their core as when we're in motion. Right, an object in motion tends to stay in motion. So for
right,
us to always be working, always be moving. I remember when I was little, and my mom would watch these the soap operas that took place in New York, and sometimes they would sing, and I would say, "Why are these actors singing in the middle of the soap opera?" And she would say, "Oh, most of these actors are Broadway actors. So they do the soap opera all day, and then at night they do theater." And I thought, oh my God, that is the most amazing life, right? That you do your show in the morning, you do your play at night, and you're
yeah,
constantly in motion. And I think when I've interviewed actors of that era here, they really get that, they really understand the magic of always doing something, and really how good it feels to be cranking the art out and be productive.
yeah,
And I think we're getting
yeah,
back to that now.
absolutely, yeah.
Now that more
That's
things are
why New
becoming.
York is kind of a special place.
Yeah, I agree. And I think now that we're going
Yeah,
back to so many people doing independent productions, right? Whether it's theater, whether it's television, whether it's film, we're getting back to that, for, if nothing but for budgetary reasons. Let's all be efficient and crank this show out. And I think it's good for people.
yeah, yeah. I agree. Yeah, it is. It
Have
focuses
you?
you. It makes you what?
Yes. Yes. No, go on, please.
Well, I was just saying that that sort of thing makes you focus on what you're trying to achieve, and you don't waste time. You don't waste motion. You
Yes.
focus yourself, and then you do what you need to do to get the job done.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely. Have you written anything um, for camera? I mean, I think of you as a great playwright, but have you written, or have you created something for camera? Have you thought about writing a show or writing a film, or have you done that?
I've written 14 film scripts.
Wow.
Okay. And then every time I meet somebody, they say, I'm going to get your movie done. And then it turns out they were just blowing smoke up my sphincter muscle. And so Sheena, I've had so much smoke blown up my sphincter muscle. I've got cancer of the tonsils.
It's like a
So,
steam cleaning, a perpetual
yeah.
steam
So
cleaning.
I can produce a play. Film is much more expensive, but I can produce a play. So when I get an idea, a lot of the times my plays are really movies that
Mm,
I didn't get the money for. So I want
mm,
to produce the play. This I have a play called Blues in My Coffee. And
mm,
if you go on YouTube and you see it, it's really a movie. It's
mm,
really a movie. But instead of going to all of it's about two black guys hitting on, one's hitting on a blonde white girl and the other's hitting on a beautiful black girl. And instead of going to all the locations, I can put it in Starbucks, have them getting a cup of coffee, and then revealing their adventure and then seeing it play out in Starbucks. So it's one set, one location, but they talk about, well, I'm going over here, I'm going over there, and that's the movie. If I had the movie money, then you'd see them going to the opera or go, you know what I mean? But I don't have the money, so I write it in the. Talking about Irish, I write it in the Irish vein, where the Irish used to write saloon plays, where everything took place in the tavern, in a saloon, and they'd be drinking, and the play took place. I think now that Starbucks is the new saloon. And so instead of drinking Irish whiskey, they're drinking coffee, cappuccino.
Right.
And
exactly.
I do it the same way. I play it the same way. Yeah.
Yeah, but
you
again,
can see
now
that go ahead.
We can see that on YouTube, right?
Go ahead. Yes. Blues in My Coffee. It's my Black Lives Matter play, and I don't want to give away the ending, but if you go on YouTube, you see it. It's comedy, but it has some drama in it. So, yes.
I think now that the world has changed, especially since COVID, right? Look at how many movies came out during COVID where actors were literally being shot at their homes and they were putting people together like this, and that was the movie. Or there's that one that's on Amazon that's brilliant, right? It has all the big actors in it, but it's an anthology, and each episode is just one actor in it and no one else, because that's what you could do during COVID. And I think the energy of what happened during COVID is forever going to affect us going forward. And it's changed the idea of what's okay and what's acceptable. You know, now somebody can be sitting with their earbuds, being a guest on MSNBC, and their kitchen roosters in the background, and we don't think anything of it. It used to be everybody had to be in the studio and it had to be very fancy. Now it's not like that anymore. And so I think that now we're going to see a lot more projects being shot on iPhones in one location. And those are things that are going to wind up on an HBO or a USA network, because the rules have just changed. Plus, Hollywood loves something that's inexpensive. So if you could shoot it cheap and get it up cheap, then they're thrilled, because they can still charge the same for it. But I do think that this idea of Zooming, I was talking to my program director, Bill, who you met earlier, about how in my entire career, this is the first time I've done something strictly for a web format that I haven't felt like I had to apologize for. I'm like, no, it's great. It's my web TV talk show, and I love it. And I love sitting here, and I love that I can interview people from all over the world, and it looks like we're sitting in the same room together. I think this idea that Zooming is less than, or StreamYarding is less than, or shooting solo things and putting them together, I think that's going away. And I think it took something like the pandemic to make it happen, but still.
We don't even audition anymore the same way. Now you put yourself, they send you the sides on email, you look at the sides, and then you do a Zoom audition. And then they send that into the studios. They send that into the director and the producers. So we used to go into the studio, read with someone, and then they might give you a couple of adjustments. They don't even do that anymore. Now it's all done on television. It's all done through the Zoom thing now, where because of the pandemic, they don't want you in the office. They don't want you in the studio because it's dangerous. It's catching. They keep shutting down the Music Man because somebody's getting COVID. So the Music Man will run for 3 days, then they got to stop the show. And then, because the lead has, COVID. So, it's a new day. It's a brand new day.
Yeah, I've noticed this week that masks are back on in stores. As I've been to the grocery store, the pharmacy, Home Depot, because I'm fixing up my childhood home. So guess who gets to go to Home Depot now? I've noticed the masks are back. So clearly COVID is back. You can always tell by how many masks there are, right? When COVID's on the upswing again. I'm glad people are being safe. Having had COVID twice, I wouldn't wish it on anyone. But I do think that it's changed the way we think of what's acceptable. And it's great. I did my, I'm an interfaith minister. As I said earlier, I work for a church in Hollywood, and I do their interfaith service once a month. And in the beginning, I was doing it in the church with just 4 people. So I would drive to Hollywood, and it would basically be my 2 senior pastors and a crew, 4 or 5 people, and that was it. And sometimes I'd bring a musical guest, but usually not, because people didn't want to come out. Sometimes our musical director would perform the music. And then about January, when the huge Omicron wave came, they called me and said,
Yeah.
look, we have so many people with COVID right now. We have no one to run your show. Can you just do it home on Facebook Live? So that's how I do it now. And there would have been a time when I was,
Wow.
in my 20s, I would have thought, oh my God, you know what I mean? It's on Facebook. It's not real. But I love it. I think it's like a fireside chat. It's extremely
Yeah.
intimate to do it just with the camera right up in my face. And I can really reach people with messages of positivity that way. So I think we're one of the things that the tragedy that has been this pandemic has brought to us, because I try to always look for, the daisy that pops out in the cemeteries, is it's been it's reworked what we think of how we can reach people. So there's better and easier ways now to communicate, for artists to get messages out, for clergy to get messages out, for people to speak to their doctors, even though they're scared to go out of the house. And I think a lot of that stuff is here to stay. And I think it's a good thing.
Well, that's the beauty of the human spirit. We will adjust. We
Yeah.
will adjust. And that's what makes the human spirit so wonderful, is that whatever you throw at it, somehow people will adjust and go on. People will figure out the best way to proceed. Yeah.
Yeah, that's very, very true. During the pandemic, since we're talking about that, Ted, um, did the whole global situation in any way affect you as a writer and the kinds of things that you were writing? Because knowing you as a friend, and also knowing you as an artist, I know that you're very tapped into humanity and a lot of the things that are going on in the world, politically, sociologically, culturally, emotionally, energetically. So how did what's gone on in the last couple of years affect what you're writing now?
Well, that's why I wrote the Blues in My Coffee, was specifically because of COVID. And I wrote the Shylock thing because of the previous president's thing on immigrants. And I
Sure.
just thought it was outrageous that he would go against immigrants. That is the body of our country, is the
I know.
immigrant.
I know.
And so I reacted to that. And the interesting thing is, I did a lot of Zoom directing. I did one show where and people wrote things like for one person, okay, and we had a guy in New Jersey and a cameraman in New Jersey. Okay, now I'm in Los Angeles. I called this pajama directing because I'd get up in my pajamas. It would be 8 o'clock in the morning, and we'd
Nice.
be shooting this thing in New Jersey. The producer was in Washington, D.C. The cinematographer was in London, England.
Wow.
And then the set designer was in France.
Wow.
And all of us would get up at a time that was a mutual time. And
Sure.
we all did our input and we directed this piece. And it was absolutely wonderful. So it's like, we can do anything,
Yeah.
We
Yeah.
found a way to make this piece work, because there's only one guy. Cameraman's wearing a mask, and he's got the camera far away. He got a zoom lens so he can go in and come back when he wants. And we
Sure.
did this. I did a couple of those. I did a thing on Louis Armstrong in Florida. Again, I was pajama directing. And we did a one-man show about Louis Armstrong called Satchmo at the Waldorf Astoria. Great actor, L. Peter Callender. He played Satchmo. And I did mirror shots and all of this stuff because we could do it. And we had
Sure.
2 cameras on that one.
Yeah.
And the guy
yeah.
was in another room operating both cameras, you know. So it was fun. So we found another way for us to say what we had to say, but at the
Yes.
same time make an impact culturally and artistically, you know.
I think
Yeah.
that's so important and so wonderful. You are amazing, my friend. That is our time. Thank you so much for being here. Let's do this again soon. And where can people find you online and learn about what you're creating?
There is Facebook. You'd have to friend me on Facebook. I don't have like a web page or any of that. So most of my stuff, or you can go on YouTube and see a lot of my work is on YouTube under my name. So yeah, do
Beautiful.
either one of those.
Thank you for being here, my
Okay.
friend. The wonderful Ted Lange, everybody. Such a joy to have you here. And thank you for sharing beautiful spiritual and emotional and creative and intellectual and cultural messages with us today, because you are such a voice. And I think people see that through your art, but they also see that just from hearing you speak. And whatever those golden era actors taught you during Love Boat, it sure worked, because you are the most lovely and wonderful gentleman. And I appreciate
Yeah.
you being a part of my life. Thank you, my friend.
Thank you, Sheena. Love you madly.
Me too, my friend. Till I see you all next time, you can find me at SheenaMetalSpiritual.com and also everywhere on social media at Sheena Metal. And here every Friday at 3 o'clock Pacific time. Thank you to my wonderful guest, Ted Lange. Thank you to KGRA Digital Broadcasting Network for having me here. We're here every Friday at 3 o'clock Pacific time. Until I see you next week, seek peace, live in love, lead with kindness, embrace unity, always work to raise your vibration, and remember that you are love and you are loved. I'm Sheena Metal, and I'll see you next week. Thank you for being here.